First of all, also in listening to some of the things that were said at the press conference, let's cool it with the Frank Robinson comparisons. David, I know exactly what David Rubenstein was going for, and I appreciate that he was making that comparison. And as a fan who's been watching the Orioles for a long time, I totally understand the comparison of that Orioles team. Was one that was on the verge of being in the World Series for the longest time. They get Frank Robinson. He puts them over the edge. He wins MVP. They win the World Series. Pete Alonso is great. Frank Robinson is Frank bleeping Robinson. Let's not put extra undue pressure on Pete Alonso.
Yeah, it's definitely a lofty comparison, but in a weird way, like David Rubenstein speaking for and to a lot of Orioles fans in saying that, like, you can't say that, you could tell people who view the game a certain way that his baseball savant page was bright red, and you know exactly what kind of player you're talking about.
Right.
And you can tell people who view baseball in a different way. It's like, kind of like Frank Robinson, and they'll be like, all right, cool. Like, they will also know exactly what you were trying to communicate with that.
Two very different.
We're just talking about two very different things, and it would also mean something if David Rubenstein was like, I looked up Pete Alonso's baseball savant page and bright red, could not believe it. Yeah. Did you see how many barrels he had in the first half? Like, that would be funny too. But
he's only was incredible.
Yeah, he's only he's not playing a road game. He is living in his own world.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. In terms of what was said from Mike Elias and Pete Alonso and even Scott Boras, I don't know how you felt about this, John, but I got the sense that, and this is probably true for most free agents, but I really got the sense that Pete Alonso wanted to be wanted. And there were some questions specifically about why he left the Mets and the fact that he re-upped with the Mets last year on that 2-year deal back in February with the opt-out after the first year. And I thought, perhaps Pete Alonso wanted to be treated more like the face of the franchise that he thought, and a lot of Mets fans thought that he was for New York. He's the all-time leader in franchise history, which is crazy to say, in Mets history, in home runs. He was the face of that team for a while. He hit 53 home runs in his rookie year. He was rookie of the year. He's multiple-time All-Star. And yet he had to wait until February to sign his deal with the Mets. And it was a 2-year deal with an opt-out after the first year. This year he signs in December. And I think it's pretty clear that he was not exactly going to wait around for the Mets to make a better offer. If an offer came across his desk, across Scott Boras's desk, that was satisfactory to him, he wasn't exactly going to wait for the Mets to jump in at the last minute and make a call.
Cough, Kyle Schwarber, cough.
Yes, cough, Kyle Schwarber, cough, which is what Kyle Schwarber was probably doing with the Phillies.
And had every right to. And
exactly. Kyle Schwarber wanted to be back with the Phillies. I think that is pretty clear. That's the Orioles, according to reporting from Ken Rosenthal, matched the offer for Kyle Schwarber. He said, nah, I'm good. I want to go back to Philly. I don't think Pete Alonso had that same level of attachment for the Mets. And I think it's fair because he wanted to have a shorter process. He wanted to everything to go smoothly last offseason, and it didn't.
Yeah. And I think that is something that nobody wants to deal with. Obviously, there is no worse kind of archetype of a player to be than a slugger who has to convince people to pay you. Because if say whatever happened in 2024, Pete Alonso, that made the Mets concerned and everyone, and I guess the whole league concerned about giving him a long-term deal. Let's say that is the player and trajectory he stays on. He can bounce around and be an itinerant slugger and make somewhere between $15 and $25 million a year. He'll sign 2-year $50 million deals with an opt out. He'll be bopping around, and that's not a good that's not a good, I don't want to say barrel of a gun. That's not a good road to be looking down.
Yeah.
This is a guy who, just had a kid. He's his life is not one that you want to be doing that. So the idea of doing what he did, which is pretty clearly like remake his swing and his approach to baseball. As I've been reading up on what he's been doing, what he did last year with the Mets and how he was kind of changing his. I think he wanted to be that kind of player for himself. He wanted to also put himself in position for this to happen.
Right.
And he did. He very clearly did. I can't imagine. I don't think it's probably a good feeling for him to have dealt with what he dealt with the Mets last year. Probably not a good feeling to kind of go into this offseason knowing the same thing is going to happen. But once it happens once, you get a good bit of clarity about it, especially with the life changes he's had. In terms of becoming a father, you just say, all right, cool. Like, let's go find a place where I want to be and where I'm wanted. And I think it's very, very interesting, all the different things he said about why this. Look, he's not going to sit up there and be like, a 5 for 155. Like, they said the word and I said, okay. Like,
right.
I think it was really interesting and kind of prescient that I think the Orioles presentation connected with him, obviously. And I think the Orioles people connected with him. And I think that's a pretty, I think they've always been able to give a good presentation and present the data, but I don't think I would have known before doing the reading about Pete Alonso that I have, that he would be the kind of guy who could have a PowerPoint resonate with him, because he very clearly is at this point. And also, I don't think, and this is something that's always challenging. Like, they had a manager and now they have a new manager, and saying the new manager is X, Y, and Z is not a reflection on the old manager. But Craig Albertaz seems like a dude that these guys are going to like really rally around. If Scott Boras makes it a point to say that like that manager right there made an impression in an hour and something happened and that means something.
Right.
That means something to me.
Yeah, no. And I think it obviously plays to human tendency to be flattered that it feels good to be sitting up there and have the general manager of a baseball team say, we really wanted this guy. This guy's phenomenal. His resume speaks for itself. We can't wait to see him come in here. And I just don't think he was going to get to that point with the Mets again.
Yeah.
I mean, I if they weren't willing to do that last year with him, then I don't think they were willing to do it this year. But also there were a lot of baseball things in that presentation, I'm sure, that resonated with him too. I mean, he talked about Craig Albertaz being the guy that he thinks can lead this team. He talked about being fired up by him. He talked about how the Orioles have this plan for him going forward, and he jives with that plan. There were a lot of things that make sense, and I'm just caught up in the honeymoon phase of all of this. Like I'm sure a lot of Orioles fans are. I'm sure there are ways where this could go wrong. There are ways that this does not end happily. But you just look at the fit of Pete Alonso on this baseball team. He brings power. He brings right-handed power. He has big media market experience. He's clutch. He wants to take on the pressure of being a face of the franchise type guy. He's going to talk to the media. He is going to be out in the community, as he said. He wants to do right. Like, there are so many reasons why somebody like this, like somebody like Pete Alonso, fits this roster perfectly. And I just think the more that I sit with it, the more it makes sense. This is really a guy who can take so much pressure off the young guys on this team. This is really a guy who can get fans back into the game, get fans excited for the game, who can deliver clutch moments at key times, whose heartbeat is going to be slow, who has experience dealing with all kinds of media reports and all kinds of attention.
Yeah.
It just makes so much sense why Pete Alonso was the guy that the Orioles decided to splurge on.
Yeah, and all those things are true. I think if you dig even deeper, between adding Taylor Ward and him, this time last year we were sitting here saying this team's going to be really good against left-handed pitching. Narrative voice, they weren't very good against left-handed pitching. That is something you need to do to be able to win this division in this league, and he will make that different. Everything that he does, it fits what the Orioles need. I think you're going to see, and I was talking to somebody I'm friends with who covers the Mets, and his perspective was that, at least in dealing with the media and the circumstances of the last 2 years, that it affected him. Like the contract stuff affected. He didn't want to be like living in that world where it was, are you going to resign then next year? Are you going to opt out? Like that was not a fun experience for Pete Alonso by all accounts. It didn't impact him on the field, but now he gets to be in a place where he doesn't have to worry about that. Yeah. Whatever energy he spent thinking about that, and guys say, I'm sure if you asked him if he was sitting right here at this table with us, he'd say, "Let's Scott worry about that." That's not how Scott was worrying about the negotiations. Pete was worrying about what his life was going to be like and where he was going to live and like where his family was going to lay down roots. So all of that is to say that this is, I think there's a baseline of production that you can expect from him. And there's also, to say, because I know nothing, I can say nothing about what it was like to be playing for the Mets, but he is going to be in a place where there's going to be an energy from his not having to deal with that stuff. There's going to be the energy from the coaching staff and being in the new role that he's in. And it feels like there's a lot of upside, even off what's a pretty sturdy floor.
Yeah. You wrote about on thebanner.com where people can subscribe $1 for 6 months about Mike Elias's comment that the Orioles may have assembled the best lineup in baseball by signing Pete Alonso, acquiring Taylor Ward. I'm still pretty far from believing that until we see Adley Rutschman be Adley Rutschman again, until we see this lineup be healthy again.
Yeah.
I mean, just the sheer amount of injuries, until we see Colton Cowser take another step forward, I think, until we see Jackson Holliday take another step forward. I'm really not ready to go there. But Mike Elias was not afraid to go there. Why do you think he said that? Do you think he believes that? And do you think it's plausible?
Yes, I think he believes it. And yes, I think it's plausible. On the first front, and I think this is part of, I guess, the second front, this is probably all the same answer. You can choose to think that all of a sudden, all of these guys just started to stink. You can. If you have eyes and you watch the Baltimore Orioles for most of the last year and a half, you can be like, maybe this was all nonsense and they were just, nothing was working and this and that. You can choose to believe that because that's kind of how it played out. Like they stopped hitting in the second half of 2024. Adley Rutschman specifically, Gunnar Henderson wasn't the same player. You can go on and on. And then last year was not the year that anyone wanted to have. But if you operate from the baseline, which I do basically because I'm pot committed, I'm just like,
You're too far down this rabbit hole.
I can't, I theoretically can. It would be like, I feel like it'd be like, I don't know what it would take, honestly, because maybe if they're bad for a third year, then I'll say all these players are bad. But I feel like if you operate off the baseline that these players, they might not be like all perennial all-stars. But is there a world where we're sitting here in like the first week in June when 7 Orioles, like everyday-ish hitters, have an OPS that's like over 750?
It's possible.
Which part is in, even if Colton Cowser is similar to the player that he was last year, if he's hitting fastballs, he's slugging. Yeah. And like, if he's walking a little bit, he's getting to 750. Jackson Holliday, depending on where he's in the lineup, what they want him to do, maybe he had some kind of come to Jesus moment, like he doesn't need to lead the team in home runs. He can just be the table setter. Who knows? Then you all of a sudden somebody who can walk does walk. Adley Rutschman gets a little bit of power back. Easy. Gunnar Henderson could have a 750 OPS in his sleep. Pete Alonso, Taylor Ward, like that's what these guys do. They hit, they slug, they get on base at a decent clip. It just feels like even if it's a big leap to get there from where we are, it's not a big leap to get there from where all these guys have been. And I think that's probably what the Orioles are thinking. And I think it's also has to be what Mike Elias is thinking, because even though he also has eyes and experience the 2024 second half and 2025 Baltimore Orioles, these are the guys that he has staked his whole career and reputation on. So he has to think they're good.
Yes, that's fair. And we saw it in the first half of 2024. I mean, this was the best offense in the league.
The best, yeah. And it was exactly that.
Yeah.
It was exactly that.
And that was with Jackson Holliday bouncing back and forth between the majors and the minors and struggling mightily in his introduction to the big leagues. That was with Anthony Santander, who is a very good switch hitter and brings a lot of power, but Pete Alonso is a better hitter overall than Anthony Santander is. So you can squint and see this group being very, very good. It feels like it's been longer than a year and a half since we've seen that. because of all the trauma that Orioles fans have had to endure over the last year. But at the same time, somebody like Pete Alonso just has the ability to, in the way that the Orioles thought Tyler O'Neill could last year, unlock a lot of the other guys because he just takes pressure off of other guys. He brings that right-handed thump. There's just so many reasons to believe that this could work.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about some starting pitching because that is still the Orioles' biggest need right now. They got their big bat. They still need one, and I'd say two starting pitchers who can immediately slot into their rotation. Last week, we talked about Ranger Suarez, Framber Valdez, Zach Gallen. We talked about Merrill Kelly, who re-upped with the Diamondbacks in the time since our last podcast. Dylan Cease already off the board as well. He signed with Toronto. We're going to talk about some more starting pitchers who are out there in free agency. And of course, the Orioles could still trade for guys, but let's focus on the starters for now. Going to talk about, I think I have 5 guys on this list here. Chris Bassitt, Michael King, Zack Littell, Nick Martinez, Lucas Giolito. Let's start with Chris Bassitt. 37 years old, righty, had an ERA of 3.96 with 8.8 Ks per 9 in 32 games last year. Honestly, I was a big proponent of the Orioles signing him 3 years ago when he became a free agent and he signed his deal with the Toronto Blue Jays, and he has been very good for the Blue Jays. He kind of was the odd man out in the Blue Jays rotation once they got to the playoffs because the rest of their rotation was so good. But he came out of the bullpen numerous times for them in the playoffs and was absolutely nails. I think the only run he gave up in the playoffs was in Game 7 of the World Series, which is tough timing. But he was phenomenal otherwise. 37 years old is 37 years old. But Chris Bassitt is still a very good starting pitcher.
Yes, he is. I like the idea. I probably would have wanted him at the beginning of his last contract and the beginning of this contract. I think that Chris Bassitt needs to be the second.
Yes.
He needs to be whatever. He cannot be the headlining pitching edition of this offseason. That's not to say that he is less than any of the others or will be going forward. I think the Orioles, in the same way that you could see them wanting to, this time last year, keep the pitching deal shorter and keep their powder dry for a bigger deal or bigger agreement now. I think they're in a position where I don't know how many rotation spots you want like blocked off in the coming years, even though that's a fraught game to play, thinking about like, oh, we can have this prospect in the rotation by X time. Like that's never how it works. It doesn't work out the way you want to.
Especially pitchers.
But I think if this Orioles offseason is even 5% actually, rather than like, even though it seems like it's more than 5%, if it's 5% motivated by like, let's not let any of the criticisms that were hurled at us in the calendar year 2025 be hurled at us again. Signing like an older starting pitcher to fill a need that many perceive to be a need that would be filled by someone in or close to or just coming off his prime and deserving to be paid as such and regarded as such. That's just not something that they should be doing.
Yeah, no, obviously coming off the offseason where they signed Charlie Morton and Tomoyuki Sugano.
And Kyle Gibson.
And Kyle Gibson, of course, lest we forget, it would probably not be the best idea to go ahead and sign somebody who's 37. And Framber Valdez, Ranger Suarez, two of the guys that we talked about last week, those guys definitely profile as the headline acquisition for your rotation.
Yeah.
So if the Orioles sign one of those two guys and then they sign Chris Bassitt, I think it would be a lot easier for fans to stomach signing a 37-year-old.
Yeah. Or if they go out and trade for a Mackenzie Gore and then they sign a Chris Bassitt. Yeah. Like, cool. That would be good.
The average age of those two guys would be what, 31, 32?
Yeah. But if we're tiering this like top end rotation, bottom, like top half, bottom half, he would just fit in the bottom half, even though he's not I think Dean Kramer would love to have the career that Chris Bassitt ends up having. He might actually be having it. Who even knows? Not going to do that right now as I'm talking about it.
Just not in April. Yeah.
May Dean is absolutely Chris Bassitt.
The thing to like about Chris Bassitt is he has, according to StatCast, 7 different pitches. His velocity is obviously not phenomenal at 37, averages just 92 miles an hour on his sinker, which he throws the most, but you can't expect a whole lot from somebody who is that age. And we've seen the Orioles do well with guys that don't throw all that hard.
And they love guys with a million pitches.
And they do love guys with a million pitches.
He'll be a great mentor to all the prospects that have that. They're just teaching how to throw a million pitches.
Yeah, Drew French is would certainly like that. Let's talk about Michael King. Michael King, I think, falls somewhere in between the headline acquisition and the middle of the rotation acquisition. I think that you could squint and see somebody who could be a top half of the rotation guy. 31 years old, 3.44 ERA last year, over 9 Ks per 9 and 15 starts. Converted reliever. He was the key piece in the Juan Soto deal between the Padres and Yankees. Unfortunately, he suffered some injuries with the Padres this past year. Missed time with long thoracic nerve issue, and then he came back and maybe rushed his rehab and had a knee issue as well. So you have some injury concerns. The age is still not something to be afraid of, 31 years old, but you do worry a little bit about somebody who missed 15, 16 starts in 2025?
Yeah, and I don't want to take over the running order here. We have a couple other pitchers who are listed here that I think I would like to talk about them in a group.
Okay.
Let's go through and talk about all of them individually, and then I think I have an overarching point that I think is prescient.
Okay.
I should have just said this beforehand.
No, this is great.
So you have Zack Littell and Nick Martinez. Do you want to do the things about them?
Yes.
Okay,
I'll run through their resumes as well.
Live podcast.
This is live podcasting, folks. The same type of live podcasting that leads to audio issues. 30-year-old Zack Littell, 3.81 ERA. Not a big strikeout guy. 6 Ks per 9 in 32 starts. Craig Alvarez has some history with Zack Littell. Pitched out of San Francisco's bullpen back when Craig Alvarez was the bullpen coach for the Giants. This past deadline, he was traded from Tampa Bay to the Cincinnati Reds and struggled a little bit down the stretch. It wasn't as good with the Reds as he was with the Rays. The Rays kind of picked him up off waivers a few years ago and just turned him into a very good starter out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, he was kind of a depth reliever, not really seen as somebody who could ever be the middle of a rotation type of guy. They turned him back into a starter, and he was phenomenal. And then Nick Martinez, somebody who can bounce back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen. The Swiss Army knife for the Cincinnati Reds, 4.45 ERA. Also not a big strikeout guy. Pitched in 40 games, 26 of them starts. Those two guys you want to lump together?
Yeah, I want to put them all three. I want to put all three of them
Michael King,
together.
Zack Littell, Nick Martinez. All three of those guys have bullpen experience, but also starting experience.
That's what I'm saying. These are good major league pitchers who can help a rotation right now and can help a pitching staff and can really make an impact on the 2026 Baltimore Orioles. I don't think it would be bad value for whatever they get. I don't think if you strike out on the top handful of pitchers that these would be bad things to do. But I think that if we're talking about what the Orioles could and should do with this offseason, I think signing any of these guys would be like missing the point. It would be like buying a frozen pizza rather than like just making a pizza yourself.
Yeah.
If we're talking about, there are pitchers around the league who can be, who are relievers, who can have their workload scaled and become starters and become incredibly valuable. They're incredibly valuable because you're paying them like relievers and through arbitration, but you're getting starter production. Once you're paying them like free agent starter money, you're not getting as much value. The Orioles should be trying to identify who the next versions of these guys are rather than paying last year's versions, like the previous versions, especially when you can very realistically go out and be in the mix and compete for and probably sign one of the top free agent pitchers, and you have a ton of capital to go out and make a trade for a pitcher. This feels like it would be very, it would be like beside the point. It would be doing what the Orioles might have done in the past, or it would be doing what, I don't think these guys are fine. If they sign them, it'll be okay. But I think the Orioles, if we're talking about, if whatever time they're spending in a room talking about these types of pitchers, I think they should be talking about how they can use this model or identify similar traits or end up with someone who they can do this with.
Yeah.
Not who not how much they can pay the guys who already did it.
And I think of Albert Suarez as the ultimate example of that.
Yeah, they did it. And it was incredibly valuable. And, there's not, I think that role is one. I understand that resources are unlimited, no budget, as Michael Elias and Scott Boras were joking about. But if there's an opportunity to be a little like, not thrifty, but like old school Orioles-y, this is one of those things. Albert Suarez counts, absolutely, but this is an area where they can use what is a very, very good pitching program and like really, really good pro scouts and say, all right, let's do this ourselves rather than go out and pay for what somebody else's finished product. That's where I sit on that particular group. And that's why I wanted to lump them together.
So if you are keeping track of our analogies on this podcast, Pete Alonso is a couch.
Yep.
Zack Littell, Nick Martinez, Michael King are all frozen pizzas.
Yeah, I don't love that one. I don't love that one as much as I love some of the other ones, but it's...
I'm going to keep bringing it up, though.
Well, I'm not going to think of a new one. But then I say that, and I'm going to interrupt you in the middle of a sentence like 10 minutes later and be like, I thought of a better one.
I think also just the sequencing of this is going to be important for the way that Orioles fans view this, too. Because if the Orioles sign one of these guys first, Orioles fans are going to throw up their hands and be like, well, we thought that they had changed their ways by signing Pete Alonso, but this is the same old Orioles. But if they go out and trade for somebody elite, if they are somehow able to, to land one of the good starting pitchers in the trade market, I'm not going to say Tarek Skubal because that would be a pie in the sky type idea, but maybe they trade for like a Joe Ryan.
Yeah.
As somebody who can fit into the top 3 of your rotation. And then they sign somebody like Nick Martinez or Zack Littell for the back end of the rotation. I think Orioles fans would be much more okay with that.
Yeah.
But you are still banking. What these guys do bring is still depth. I mean, the Orioles still need to get some kind of depth for their rotation. And they can't just rely on waiver claims or $2 million contracts or minor league contracts in order to get that kind of depth or some of their prospects coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's to say that in the trade for the actual guy, the Orioles are going to be giving up a ton in that trade? I think they're probably okay with doing that because they're going to have, they have some players that they kind of need to trade. They have a ton of like, 5 to 20 ranked prospects who teams are going to want, and they have a ton of guys they're going to have to think about for the Rule 5. So they can overpay just a little. And maybe there's a reliever. Maybe their own version of Michael King is in that trade too.
Right.
And then you're okay with that. I think that for the prices of what you are going to be, paying for this like area, it's not like an unreliable thing. It's just not my favorite thing. And your point about the sequencing is exactly right. That's what's going to happen. And like, I'm basically, my guard is down right now, but once the pitchers start to happen, they're probably just going to happen really fast. It's kind of how Scott Boras operates with his guys. We know I think we've talked about it, and I haven't known on the last 3 podcasts which ones are represented by him, but I think it's Imai and Ranger Suarez and Michael King.
Yes.
So those guys are going to kind of go in some order.
Right.
There's going to be like, all right, boom, boom, boom. Framber Valdez really doesn't have any reason to sign before that and like jump the market and not let those guys set the market. So it's all going to happen fast, but once it starts happening, then we'll kind of know the answer. But until then, I don't think that even though this is a team that did just all of a sudden be like, hey, anybody ever heard of Tomoyuki Sugano?
Yeah.
I don't know that is necessarily how they're going to approach the pitching side, because you don't want to be left like without a chair, but you don't want to kind of like be the person who's just sitting down while everyone's like walking around in the circle and everyone's like, what's this guy doing? Because you're not playing the game at that point. And I think they're playing the game.
You mentioned Tatsuya Imai. We also did talk about Tatsuya Imai on our last podcast as well. So if you want a scouting report on him, go back and listen to our podcast 2 episodes ago before the Pete Alonso signing. There's also this other group of free agent starters that is below the class that we just talked about. Tyler Mahle, Zach Eflin, Tyler Anderson, Justin Verlander, Jose Quintana. Those are all the probably guys that are going to have to sign 1-year deals.
Yeah.
And those are guys that, again, probably should warrant even less consideration from the Orioles. If they are signed as the Orioles back end guy, maybe fine, but they shouldn't dramatically change. The Orioles shouldn't sign one of those guys and be like, all right, dust up we can close the books, guys. We're just about done with the free agent additions to our starters.
Yeah, I think, and it's a tricky position to be in because all the things you said are true. And also you need to think about like covering a lot more innings than just like, yes, the Orioles have, Trevor Rogers and Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells, but there is a certain amount of innings that those guys just aren't going to be able to be counted on for.
Yes.
Are you going to sign? I'm just going to throw in maybe a Zach Eflin is the type of guy you look at because it's like, oh, take your time, get yourself ready. We're going to need you at some point, but like, you're not signing with us because you think you're going to start on opening day again. Not only will you not start on opening day, you might not be on the opening day roster. It's not because we're going to option you to Norfolk and make you, live in Norfolk for like 2 months. But as somebody who's like from the Southwest Florida area, and maybe he can like get to slowly rehab with the Orioles. And when the time comes, they have somebody who they could maybe make it a 6-man in June or July and let those guys stretch out a little bit and have a little more rest. Like that is the type of, you have to really kind of target who that person is. Maybe you want somebody who's a little more Albert Suarez-y where they could sit in the bullpen for a week and not pitch and then come in and throw 5 innings if you need them. Like maybe that's what you want for that role, but it's going to be challenging to, in a quality way, get someone to sign up for that.
Yeah. And also I thought if the Orioles were going to do that with anybody, it would have been Grayson Rodriguez. I mean, I thought that they would have slow played him this winter into spring and just been like, you take your time, you come back wherever, we're going to bolster the rotation in the meantime. But if you come back in June and you're pitching great, we'll throw you right back in. And they decided to trade Grayson Rodriguez to the Angels. So,
yes, they did.
Angels have just been collecting these reclamation projects, by the way. They keep signing guys that are.
They keep signing guys.
Pomeranz and Jordan Jordan Romano.
Yeah.
Romano, I think is the correct pronunciation there.
We also, not that we would have occasion to, but like Brady Anderson is our hitting coach.
That's right.
Brady Anderson is the Angels hitting coach.
That is right.
We were doing other stuff at the winter meetings.
I don't think that was top of mind for us.
No, but I really wish that and he talked a little bit about it. But I really wish, Kurt Suzuki was. And I really wish I wanted to go. And I read what he said. I wanted to hear it. I might have had some follow-up questions.
That would have been.
But Kurt Suzuki was talking a lot about how he has a lot of good ideas, and he's really excited to work with Brady. He's got good energy, and did
the Angels come to Camden Yards this season?
They have to. Yeah, I think that's the rules.
Yeah, I mean they're American League team. They got to go home and home, right?
Yeah. So I'm pretty interested to see how that's going to work out. Obviously,
that's going to be so fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
my favorite. Because I obviously am too young to have covered Brady Anderson's playing days. I was covering the Orioles sort of when he was involved in the front office, but he was involved in. It was one of the reunions, and they had a home run derby.
Okay.
At Camden Yards. Do you remember this? It was in like 2017 or 18, maybe. It might have been when they were celebrating the 25th anniversary of the ballpark. I can't remember, but they had a home run derby at Camden Yards, and Brady Anderson was just, I mean, you see Brady Anderson now, he looks like he could still play.
Yeah.
He was just hitting tanks. It was incredible. Everybody else was like, oh boy, I hope I can still swing this old bat. And Brady Anderson was just going up there and just bopping them.
Yeah.
Oppo Taco, just sending souvenirs everywhere.
Yeah, I it's really fascinating. Yeah, he does in fact have a lot of good ideas.
August is first week of August is when the Angels come to Camden Yards. By the way,
I will be. That's usually
your Brady Anderson jerseys.
Okay. So if that's a midweek series, I will be there. I usually
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Okay, cool. That's great for me. Usually that's my niece's birthday around that time. Usually missed that. There's also usually an Orioles celebration that weekend. I don't know what you celebrate in 2026. What's the anniversary?
They'll find something.
60th anniversary of the World Series, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know who's still
66.
I don't know who's signing. Did I do the math right?
Palmer?
30, 60, 50,
Yeah,
60.
60.
Yeah. Wow.
Palmer will be there.
He will be there. I don't know who else is still signing, but I will not be there. I usually miss those celebrations, which is always a sad moment for me. I say on an audio medium where no one can see my face.
All right. That just about does it for the Banner Baseball Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. I think maybe next week we can dive into some of the trade candidates for the Orioles, especially in the starting pitching market. But who knows? The Orioles might have already made a move by then that we will have to discuss. Of course, next week is Christmas, so hopefully we can sneak in an episode, maybe early in the week.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Why not? At John Meoli is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano. Of course, John's great newsletter, Inside the Dugout, is available on thebanner.com, where you can subscribe at $1 for 6 months. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks to everybody for sticking with us through some audio issues. If you were watching on any of your favorite video platforms, X, Facebook, YouTube, all that good stuff, and write us a 5-star review on audio platforms, and I'll read it out here on the show. For John Meoli,